For those of us that are gaming as well as streaming or video recording that gameplay on the same computer, there's definitely some hurdles that have to be overcome in terms of performance. Now, streaming, video recording, pretty much just screen capturing whatever is going on your display is going to use up valuable resources that now can't be put towards that game you're playing. So you're gonna see a reduction in frame rate, and you're most likely also going to see a slight increase in latency just because that video processing that is going on is taking away from the game. And although there are some different options when it comes to encoding that video, the biggest one out there, especially for Nvidia GPU owners, is going to be NVENC. And NVENC has pretty much replaced all software encoding and CPU-based encoding, and it's recording and screen capping and encoding that video all on the graphics card, which is a lot more powerful and a lot more processor intensive and can just go through that work a lot more easier than your CPU or software can do it. So when it comes to NVENC, there's of course going to be different implementations who can get the most efficient usage of NVENC. And when you think about it a little bit, NVIDIA is definitely going to be the one that can manage that implementation the best because they designed, they architected, they did everything when it comes to producing NVENC for use on NVIDIA graphics cards. So when it comes to the actual FPS reduction or frame rate reduction that we're going to see in games, we're going to see a lot less of it using NVIDIA's own screen capping and screen recording software, which is in GeForce Experience. So within GeForce Experience, you have the ability to screen cap whatever it is that's going on in your screen, whether that be gameplay or just your screen in general. And there's definitely some limitations to that software. It's not super user customizable. You pretty much have your base settings for GeForce Experience, but the performance is pretty good when it comes to using their implementation versus the biggest one out there, which is OBS. Now, OBS gives you, of course, all of the customizability when it comes to your audio inputs, video input, the game capture itself. You have a lot more control over the details, but it comes at a cost, being that OBS is a completely free software not developed by the ones who created NVENC encoding. So there's definitely some overhead when it comes to performance, which we're gonna take a look at now.
So we're gonna start off our comparison or analysis with a pretty easy to run game, which is Valorant. And as we can see through this graph, with no screen capture going on whatsoever, we're sitting at 235-ish FPS. And using GeForce Experience, that drops by 4.4% down to 225, and with OBS, it drops by 6.7% down to 219. So although, 5 FPS doesn't sound like that big a deal, in a title where you might see less FPS or your system just can't handle this high of a number, a 3% difference or a 2% difference in frame rate is definitely going to be decently noticeable if you're hitting a lower end in frames. But this is a pretty easy to run game. So let's see what happens when we run a slightly more difficult title like a game of Fortnite. So with Fortnite, it's a slightly harder game to run. We're going to see higher GPU utilization, but we should still see higher frame rates. So here you go. With no screen cap going on whatsoever, we're sitting at right around 238 FPS. With GeForce Experience during our screen cap, we're sitting at 220-ish FPS, which is a 7.7% reduction. But with OBS, we're hitting another 2% drop over GeForce Experience like we saw in Valorant, down at 9.5% compared to without screen cap whatsoever at 215 FPS. So again, you're seeing a 5% reduction, or a 5 FPS reduction at this high of an FPS, but that 2-3% could make a bigger difference with a less powerful system that might not have a 3080 Ti in it like mine does. And that is kind of noticeable now. We'll see that with a really hard game to run in Halo Infinite, all ultra settings. And this one we're getting right around that 120-ish FPS mark. So with no screen cap, 114.74 FPS. Only a right around 1% reduction with GeForce Experience, dropping us to 113.96, and a 5.5% reduction with OBS. So now we're going from 115 FPS down to 108. that's a decently noticeable difference. It's almost, 8 or 6 to 8 FPS difference on average, but frame dips could be slightly larger in a game like this. And there's definitely a reason behind the bigger difference in a game like Halo, in that we're seeing almost 100% GPU utilization in this game, which we'll see coming up shortly. So this is all of the GPU utilizations mapped out for all 3 games. So with Halo, we're at 96% for every single screen recording, without screen recording, whatever it is, 96% utilization, which means if we have to use more due to NVENC encoding, all of that's going to be taken away from the game FPS. And that's why we see the bigger hit with OBS. And we still see that GPU utilization increase with OBS on the remaining 2 games, which is right around a 4 to 5% increase in GPU utilization, meaning that we're going to see that 4 to 5% less frames in game. And this is just another illustration of that with render latency. So this is just for Fortnite, but it takes the same toll for all of the different games. So here you can see for every single frame that needs to be rendered by your GPU, without any screen cap, 2.68 milliseconds to render a frame versus 3.35 with GeForce Experience and 3.84 with OBS. And that's the overhead of NVENC encoding. It's going to take longer to render the frames because now you're screen capping it and also outputting it to your video monitor or your display. So this is just an illustration of that extra overhead that OBS requires compared to a super clean implementation like GeForce Experience.
So as you guys could tell from all the graphs and all the numbers I threw at you, there's definitely a performance savings using GeForce Experience over OBS, but I wouldn't necessarily tell you to start using GeForce Experience instead of OBS unless it's purely just for screen capture. You're not going to overlay any video or audio. You're just going to use it pretty much to record your screen and then use that in a YouTube video or post it on any of your social media sites. So if that's the case, GeForce Experience is definitely the way to go if you do have an Nvidia graphics card, but the majority of people are going to use OBS. So hopefully the support from the Nvidia side of things towards developers like OBS allows for cleaner implementations of NVENC encoding and allows that 2 to 3% overhead that we're seeing in terms of FPS drop in all of these titles. Hopefully that can go away soon with some upgrades and continuous efficiency improvements to that implementation. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, leave it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments about anything that you saw in the video, definitely leave those down below. And if you haven't already, get subscribed to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.